Hi, everybody. This is Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue, author of The Snowball System, and trainer to over 15,000 experts all over the world on sound, authentic business development techniques. I'm real excited today because we have Ozan Varol, the author of Think Like a Rocket Scientist. It is a great book, and his principles about how to think like a rocket scientist, I found really applicable to business development. Now, this is a really cool set of tools to mash up. How do we think with the science and the steps and the stories of business development? So I love the book. I was super geeked out and excited to have Ozan on the show. We have some mutual friends. And in this first question I ask Ozan, I got 4 questions I'm going to ask him. In this first one, I'm going to ask him for his big idea on how we can use his principles to be better at business development. Now, before we get there, don't forget, you can head over to growbigplaybook.com if you want to get our weekly tools and tips on how to get better at business development yourself. growbigplaybook.com. Weekly, short, concise email, pulling all of our gratis, our complimentary tools in one place so that you can get them right when they come out, and you're going to get some inspiration, you're going to get some nudges, you get some ideas on how you can take your business development game to the next level. So head over to growbigplaybook.com for that. And without further ado, here is Ozan Varol. Man, I am excited to introduce Ozan Varol today. My name's Mo Bunnell. I'm your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. And I'm so excited because Ozan's book is just so great. I enjoyed digging into it. And who doesn't want to think like a rocket scientist? That's the title of his book. And I think he's going to provide a really interesting perspective on this season's questions on how we can take a big idea and improve our abilities to do business development, to bring in the meaty business that we want to do, and specifically, how do we manage our opportunities, bringing in the business we want, how do we manage our relationships, and how do we manage ourselves? So, Ozan, I'm really excited you're here with us today. Give us your big idea from Think Like a Rocket Scientist. How can our audience take your content and become better skilled at business development?
So I opened the book by describing how President John F. Kennedy stepped up to the podium, and this was in September 1962. So he steps up to the podium at Rice University Stadium and pledged to land a man on the moon before the decade is out. Now, at the time, this pledge was quite literally a moonshot. A lot of the people in the audience thought that Kennedy was out of his mind. Even officials at NASA thought that Kennedy was promising the impossible, because so much of what would be required to land on the moon just hadn't been done yet. No American astronaut had worked outside of a spacecraft. 2 spacecraft had never docked together in space. NASA didn't know if the lunar surface was solid enough to support a lander. They didn't know if the communication system would work on the moon. Kennedy said some of the metals required to build the rockets hadn't been invented. So we jumped into the cosmic void and hoped that we'd grow wings on the way up. And less than 7 years after Kennedy's pledge, Neil Armstrong took his giant leap for mankind. And just to set that accomplishment in context, a child who was 6 years old when the Wright brothers took their first flight, which lasted about 10 seconds and moved about 100 feet, would have been 72 when flight became powerful enough to put a man on the moon. That's 66 years from Wright brothers to Neil Armstrong. And that giant leap often is celebrated as the triumph of technology. But it wasn't. It was the triumph of a certain thought process that rocket scientists used to turn the seemingly impossible into the possible. So I wanted to write a book that's dedicated to that thought process, not to teach people the science behind rocket science, but how can you take these frameworks of thinking from rocket science and apply it to your own personal and professional life to be able to make giant leaps. And I think one takeaway here from what NASA was able to accomplish is the combination of idealism and pragmatism. So putting a man on the moon, this wasn't just dreaming big and, sprinkling some pixie dust and hoping that your dreams magically take flight. It was that combination of idealism, of pragmatism, of, yeah, dreaming big, but also working backward from that dream, figuring out exactly what needs to be done to get there, and then really methodically tackling each problem and each step along that roadmap to be able to accomplish what most people thought was impossible.
Yeah, Ozan, I love it. And I think it makes me think back to early in my career. I can remember when I was a senior partner at a big consulting firm. And one of my other partners said, we will never provide this service to that client. And that was my moonshot. I'm like, oh, just because you said that, we're going to figure out a way to do it. And lo and behold, a year later, we were signing a contract and starting to do that work for a client when he said it will never be able to happen. But as I thought back, it was the fact that provided motivation for me. And I thought of that as I was reading the opening story of the book. I remembered it, but that his comment, his challenge, his "you could never do it" made me want to do it more. And if I think back to why it worked, it was a whole team galvanizing around making that happen and then working in really small steps to make it happen. Idealism and pragmatism. So one of the things you talk about in the book I thought was really cool was this idea of reasoning from first principles. Does that play into this idea of having a big lofty goal that some people say you can't do, but taking small steps every single day to get there?
For sure. I think reasoning from first principles is a really powerful way of reimagining what's possible, reframing what's possible. So just to give a very brief definition, it's a way of taking a really complicated system and questioning all assumptions, breaking it down to its fundamental subcomponents. So it's a way of letting go of everything except for what is essential. So it's as if you're hacking through a jungle with a machete, but getting rid of all of these assumptions in your life that are cluttering the way you think, that are cluttering the way that you approach your business. One of the examples I give in the book of first principles thinking at work in rocket science is the idea or the assumption that was embedded into rocket science for decades that rockets could not be reused. So rockets, once they delivered their payload into orbit, would either burn up in the atmosphere or plunge into the ocean, requiring an entirely new rocket to be rebuilt. Now imagine for a moment doing that for commercial flights. Like I'm in Portland, Oregon, I fly to New York City, passengers leave the plane, and then somebody steps up to the plane and just torches it, just lights it on fire. Sounds ridiculous, but that's what we did for rockets for decades. And the cost of a rocket is actually about the same as a Boeing 737, but spaceflight is so much more expensive because rockets, unlike airplanes, could not be reused, at least not efficiently. Now, SpaceX and Blue Origin have both used first principles thinking to question that assumption and hang a question mark at the end of what was taken for granted in the aerospace industry. And so now we have a landing pad next to the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center. I mean, SpaceX has now refurbished so many of its rocket boosters and just sent them back out to space like certified pre-owned vehicles. And it's all because someone was willing to step back and ask, here's a piece of conventional wisdom. Can we question it? And can we replace it with something better?
Oh, Ozan, I love it. And one last question as we wrap up this episode. What you're making me think of is status quo bias, anchoring the idea that we as a client team don't think client XYZ would hire us for ABC because they haven't done it before or whatever. Like we're on this path all the time to sort of do what we did before as a client team. The client is on a path to sort of view us as the experts in what we've been hired, but maybe not what they should hire us for. So I think what you're saying here is I loved your idea of cluttering assumptions. Somehow hack through those as a client team because we owe it on ourselves to develop a better picture, a better future for our clients in the future. So we owe it upon ourselves for us to get rid of those cluttering assumptions and be able to cast some kind of vision for how we might be able to serve a client even more or better than we have before. Does that resonate at all as we sort of wrap this one up?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a quote I love from Alan Alda. He says, "Your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off every once in a while or the light won't come in." So I think it's really important to ask yourself, do we own our assumptions or do our assumptions own us? What are we doing simply because we've done it before, or simply because other people around us are doing it? And can we question that assumption and replace it with something better?
Oh, I love it. Okay, that is the perfect wrap to this episode. It's inspiring. And folks, make sure, if you like this one, make sure you listen to the next one, because we're going to talk about how can we use think like a rocket scientist and all the things we've been talking about. We're going to start to talk about how to bring more deals across the goal line, how to get more yeses, how to create a better future, but contractually with our clients, where we're serving them, helping them achieve more than they ever thought that they could. So Ozan, what should people do if they want to take the next step with you, if they want to hear more things like this?
The best way to keep in touch with me is through my weekly email. It's called the Weekly Contrarian. It goes out to over 30,000 subscribers, and it's a really quick read. So it shares one big idea that you can read in 3 minutes or less. And you can sign up for that at weeklycontrarian.com. And when you sign up, you'll also get a free ebook called The Contrarian Handbook, 8 Principles for Innovating Your Thinking.
Oh, perfect. And I'll tell you, folks, I signed up for it myself as I was prepping for this interview, and I absolutely love being on Ozan's list. So go do it, weeklycontrarian.com. You can see that in the show notes as well if you just want to click on a link. That's it for this episode. Check out the next one to really dig deep into managing opportunities.